Please be seated. Contest rewrites 10 commandments. An article on CNN a few years back reported on two atheists who wanted to rewrite the 10 commandments. The article began with this question: what if, instead of climbing Mount Sinai to receive the 10 commandments from God, Moses had turned around to the Israelites and asked, hey, what do you guys think? What should we do? That was the idea behind the Rethink Prize, which was put out to crowdsource 10 commandments for the 21st century. Now, this was popular, as you can guess. The contest drew more than 2,800 submissions from 18 countries around the world. There was a team of 13 judges, and they selected 10 of the more sober and serious submissions and announced the winners, each of whom received a $10,000 prize for their winning commandment. The article summarized the list in this way: there's nary a thou shalt among them, nothing specifically about murder, stealing, or adultery, although there is a kind of version of the golden rule, which presumably would cover all of those crimes. Now, if they lack the divine, this list does display a robust faith in humanity. There are 10 winning entries, and I'm going to read them to you now. I think you'll find them interesting. Number 1, be open-minded and be willing to alter your beliefs with new evidence. Number 2, strive to understand what is most likely to be true, not to believe what you wish to be true. Number 3, the scientific method is the most reliable way of understanding the natural world. Number 4, every person has the right to control their body. Number 5, God is not necessary to be a good person or to live a full and meaningful life. Number 6, be mindful of the consequences of all your actions and recognize that you must take responsibility for them. Number 7, treat others as you would want them to treat you and can reasonably expect them to want to be treated. Think about other people's perspective. Number 8, we have the responsibility to consider others, including future generations. Number 9, there is no one right way to live. And number 10, leave the world a better place than you found it. So what do you think? I have to say, me, for the most part, I can get on board with most of these. I share pretty much a lot of these values. In fact, I do think that the world would be a much better place if all of us could agree to uphold many of these lists of 10 tenets. But you know what? There's still something that's missing for me in here. In fact, I rather think that this contest might have missed the one key point of the 10 commandments that is central for me. I get the sense that the two people who sponsored the contest saw the 10 commandments as, well, kind of like a set of rules handed down from on high. Do this, don't do that, or else. And you know what? To be fair, the 10 commandments have been used in this way many, many, many times and in plenty of different contexts. I mean, it's part of why they often appear outside courthouses. They're there as a sort of a warning about the lines that we shouldn't cross if we don't want to find ourselves facing judge and jury. They are, after all, called the law, and stylistically, well, they kind of are written like rules. But the thing is, I don't think a list of rules was really God's intention when handing these out. The clue for me is where the 10 commandments start. They start with, I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of Egypt. You see, that's not about regulating behavior. That's an invitation. It's an invitation into a relationship. If you read through that whole first part, it's like God is saying, this is who I am. I love you, and I want you to live life in abundant freedom. This covenant between us, it's my gift to you to make all of this possible. So won't you join me? If you think about it, that's a wonderful promise. And that's what's kind of being explained in those first 4 commandments. If we really listen to what God is and open up to all the ways that we're being invited to walk along with God and God's way. And you know what? I think if we did that, the rest of those rules would just sort of flow without much effort. A just, a peaceful society, all of that, I think it would just unfold. It's like God's just saying to us, stay with me in this. Keep your eye on the prize, and I promise it'll work out for everyone. The first commandment is the invitation into a special relationship or covenant, which is a 2-sided thing that we both, us and God, have promises, obligations, and ways that we have this intimate relationship together. The thing is, I know it kind of seems like God then goes on and gets a little bit insecure and makes extra sure that there's really no competition for God's love. But I think that commandments 2, 3, and 4 aren't actually written for God, they're written for us. They're commandments that are there to remind us not to betray this 2-way relationship between us and God by twisting it and using it instead for our own purposes. I mean, think about it. Don't make idols is about the damage that we can do to each other when we try to put ourselves or our stuff in the place of God. We start to act like we're owed more than other people, like we deserve more, or we think we can just do whatever we want without regard to the needs of other people. And we know how that ends up. And so does God. Now, don't misuse God's name, I think is really about all of the ways that people try to then go on and justify all of those selfish, self-centered actions by claiming that it is actually God's will that they're acting that way. I mean, people do this all the time, don't they? Slavery, genocide, domestic violence, and oligarchy are just a few of the ways that human societies have used God to justify their own abuses of power. But you know what? It comes out in small stuff too. Basically, any time that we think that we are better than someone else because we have God on our side is a breach of that 3rd commandment to not take God's name in vain. Now, commandment number 4, well, that's not our vacation benefits package, right? Remembering the Sabbath is actually a weekly reminder of the full implications of God's character and the nature of this covenant relationship that God is offering to us. And lest we forget, it takes a great deal of care to remind us that everyone's included in this. We have to make sure that we take care of the needs of all, especially the most vulnerable among us. I mean, that list that God gives us is pretty specific. It's right on down to people and animals, foreign and not. They all are people that are listed that have very little standing and are completely dependent upon the mercy and goodwill of the powerful. So no matter how wrapped up in our own gain we might get as we work and strive each week, Sabbath gives us rest with God. Sabbath gives us a chance to step away from some of the ways that we might harm others, whether intentional or inadvertent, in all of our labors. And Sabbath gives us a chance to remind ourselves of God's way, so that we can do better in the coming week. Sabbath is how God modeled creation for us from the very beginning, those first 7 days. So I wonder sometimes if we could just get those 4 commandments right, well, then we'd be fully holding up our side of our relationship with God, and all that other stuff in the rest of the list, well, it just wouldn't happen. Murder, coveting, etc., it would be gone. I think Psalm 19 is a gorgeous, imagery-laden, poetic laying out of that exact same point. This psalm paints for us a really beautiful and inextricable relationship between the creation and its creator. All that is, it says, is from heavens all the way down to the darkest deep. Every last bit of that mirrors God's being. The intimacy and the joy of this connection, it's like that of a marriage. The covenant, the law, all of those things, they bring rejoicing in our heart and light to our eyes. And living in God's way is sweeter than honey dripping from a honeycomb. I mean, we get the picture, right? A mere set of rules would never elicit that kind of reaction. But a relationship with a God who is with us and guiding us, forgiving us, welcoming us back when we mess up, no matter what. Well, that is worth writing poetry about. And yeah, you know what? We probably could all work out commandments 5 through 10 on our own if we were asked to write out the rules for humanity. I mean, if it was me, I'd streamline them up as honor your family, don't hurt others, and you know what? Be happy with what you have. But the problem is that we would be missing out on the heart of the matter, that God is here to be in relationship with us no matter how well we're doing on this project of living in God's way. God is here with us through all of that. That's just who God is, and that's exactly how God works. You see, God knows that not one of us is a perfect rule follower. We're all wrapped up in these systems and habits and human tendencies that are so much bigger than any one of us. No matter how well we try to nail down all those rules of life, we still manage to breach them, hurting others and hurting ourselves. I think today's gospel is a case study on how this dynamic plays out in the messiness of human life, and why, at the end of the day, it's God's character and our relationship with this loving, forgiving God that is really what carries us through all of that. Now, every scholar that I read talking about this particular passage in Jesus' ministry agrees that Jesus is not, in fact, anti-commerce or against having commerce take place in the temple per se. I mean, people actually needed a way to get animals to be able to make their sacrifice to God once they had traveled to Jerusalem. Instead, they suggest that Jesus is livid because the temple authorities have corrupted the system. They've done it in order to line their own pockets. Now, the escalating greed of the temple authorities means that it's getting harder and harder for people to afford to make their offering to God. And in fact, the poorest have been excluded from worshiping God entirely by this point. Theologian Lawrence Moore puts it this way: Jesus was aware of how economic systems take on a life of their own. They benefit some at the expense of others. Economic exploitation, both in Jesus's day and today, relies on the system being so complicated that we can't actually see all of its moving parts. We don't know how much everyone in the chain of people that bring our Amazon or DoorDash deliveries to our door is paid, or how they're treated along the way. And what other choice do we have if going to the grocery store means getting sick, right? That's how all of this systematic exploitation ends up co-opting people, even when we have the best of intentions. Now, most people back in Jesus's time probably didn't even question what was going on in that temple economy. After all, the temple authorities had told them that it was God that demanded it of them. It took Jesus's anger for people to start to see, to start to look differently, for them to be reminded that no one, no matter how powerful or supposedly holy, is outside of God's law to care for even the most vulnerable among us. That no one should be excluded from engaging in a relationship with God. Now, there's a form of this story about Jesus in every last one of the Gospels. But only John's gospel puts it right at the beginning of Jesus's ministry. The other three put it near the end. I think John is saying that God is here in Jesus right from the start to confront all of the powers and the corruption that we human beings have unleashed on ourselves and on our world. Jesus came to liberate us from the unjust systems that betray our covenant walk in God's way and help us to love all once again. But you know what? Those human systems and the beneficiaries of the accumulated power, all of those people who have made idols of themselves and their wealth, all of the ways that they're misusing God to justify what they're doing, they just fought back against Jesus. They might even have thought that they won when they managed to execute Jesus. Yeah, you see, human beings, we think that we can muddle through and just write our own rules, but we seem to mess up the living part of the equation over and over again. By going it alone, we'd miss out. We'd miss out on meeting a God whose love is there for us and for this whole creation. A God whose love just knows no bounds. We'd miss out on discovering who God is and how God intends our world to be. And you know what? We'd never know that in Jesus, God came to liberate us from all of the ways that humanity rebels against that relationship. It's a relationship that is waiting for us always. And Jesus came to make that real for us. And you know what? At the end of the day, if we kept God out of the equation, we'd just miss out on the final, most amazing part of this story, that God's character is revealed through resurrecting Jesus. I don't think there's a human being in any time or any place who could have conceived that this is how that story would end, that this is the extent to which God's all-encompassing length, breadth, and height of his love and grace and mercy could extend for all of us. I mean, Paul kind of puts it right there on the page. God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. I reckon that we could write some pretty good rules without having to bring God into it. But God has so much more in store for us. That grace thing, that means that every last one of us, no matter how privileged or powerless, no matter how much we fail or faltered in life, that grace thing says that all of us have a place with God. That is who God is. It was revealed in the very act of creation. God wrote it into the covenant, the 10 Commandments, also known as the law. God made it manifest in Jesus's life, death, and resurrection. And this new life of forgiveness and wholeness is meant for every last one of us, all around us, even the most vulnerable. God is recreating heaven and earth as we speak, so that it fully mirrors God's perfect love and God's perfect justice and God's perfect grace for all. So listen for your invitation. This is who I am. I love you. I want you to live life in abundant freedom. this covenant between us, it's my gift to you to make all of this possible. So won't you join me? Love God.